Qualifying for the Belgian Grand Prix is over, and it is Kimi Antonelli in the Mercedes on pole position. But did you know that qualifying's pole lap this year was almost 4 seconds slower than last year's pole lap? Why was that? Well, that's what I'm going to be talking about in today's video. Now, let's get into the video. So, Kimi Antonelli took pole position and beat Max Verstappen to it after Verstappen had quite a bit of help from Isaac Hadjar, giving him the slipstream of all slipstreams in Sector 3. And despite it helping Max, it was not quite enough to help him against the young Italian driver. But that is not really what I want to talk about here. What I do want to talk about though is just how much slower these cars are at Spa and how much slower they look around the Spa-Francorchamps circuit. Spa is a classic high-speed circuit with some of the most legendary corners in the sport, such as Eau Rouge, Les Combes, Puyon, and Blanchemont, just to name a few. But this year, thanks to these power unit regulations, these high-speed iconic corners have been tamed quite a lot, and instead of them being high-speed corners, they've been more like recharge zones for the batteries. And due to the size of the circuit, the 2026 F1 cars have been significantly energy starved during qualifying laps, and it has really affected the one-lap pace of the cars at this track. It also means that some of the challenging corners have instead been very easily flat out instead of actually a challenge, because the cars just don't have enough power and the cars are slowing down despite going full throttle. Now, Mercedes was the fastest car today, and I will be comparing last year's pole lap to this year's pole lap later on, so do stick around for that. But before then, I want to talk about Aston Martin. So, Aston Martin have had a disastrous 2026 season so far, and it is really not looking any better this weekend. It is frankly a miracle that Fernando Alonso managed to score a point in this car at Monaco, because let's be honest, the car is not worthy of a P20, let alone a P10. And with Belgium being the largest track on the calendar, we have seen quite possibly their worst performance this year, as Fernando Alonso managed to qualify 2 seconds away from the next car, which was Sergio Perez in the Cadillac. 2 seconds! That is literally an eternity in F1 terms. Alonso's time was 2 seconds off of Perez and an eye-watering 5.7 seconds away from Kimi Antonelli's pole position lap time. When Alonso asked what his goal was for the weekend, Alonso responded saying that it was for the race to be over so that he could go and watch the World Cup final. And when you look at that lap time, you can see why. To give you an idea of just how bad this lap time was, I want to take you back to the year 2012. Please do bear with me on this one real quick. So back in 2012 at the Belgian Grand Prix, Jenson Button took pole position in the McLaren with a 147.573 and Pedro de la Rosa in the HRT, which is commonly regarded as one of the worst ever F1 cars relative to the competition, qualified with a time of a 153.0. The difference between these two fastest laps was 5.5 seconds. So Alonso's gap in the Aston Martin was even larger than the gap of a HRT to the fastest car, which is absolutely insane. So let's now compare Fernando Alonso to Sergio Perez so we can see just how he's 2 seconds off from Perez. And when you take a look at these two laps, it is honestly just depressing for Aston Martin and Honda, because it is clear they don't have the downforce or the battery or the engine or just about anything. On the run down the Camel Straight, you can see how Fernando Alonso has to super clip way earlier than Sergio Perez. Then through Les Combes, Perez just carries more speed, and it is just about faster everywhere for Sergio Perez. Look at the run then on the exit of turn 9 down the hill. You can immediately see that Alonso has no battery to deploy, whereas Perez does at least have some before they reach Puyon Corner. then all the way through the rest of the lap, Cadillac is just faster and has more power and more grip. And honestly, for an Alonso, this is just depressing. Overall, there is a pretty crazy 2-second gap between them. I just want to say, if you are enjoying the video so far, then I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button, as it really helps me out. But now, let's get back to what I actually wanted to talk about in this video, which is comparing this year's pole lap to last year's pole lap. So I want to talk about the difference then between Lando Norris's lap time from last year to Kimi Antonelli's pole lap this year. And yes, I understand this is the difference between the first year of a set of regulations and the final year of a previous set of regulations. And yes, I know what you might be thinking, but Pulse, you are generally very positive on these cars and these regulations. And yes, I am one of the few that actually does enjoy these regulations. I enjoy watching these cars race. I think it's a lot more fun than what we've seen from F1 in the last few years. But even I am able to criticize these cars when I need to. And watching qualifying at Spa this year was frankly depressing, and it is worthy of me actually criticizing these cars somewhat. Because honestly, these cars have kind of ruined Spa. And while I love watching these cars race, I am aware that sometimes qualifying does suffer. And this weekend was one of those instances where we really saw the cars exposed. So let's start with the beginning of the lap. And already on the run to La Source at turn 1, Norris is carrying far more speed at the corner, as Norris is doing 295 km per hour compared to Antonelli, who only reached 282 km per hour. At the apex of the corner, there's not really too much to tell between them, as you would really expect. But look at the exit. Kimi Antonelli does have access to straight line mode here and full deployment, and the Mercedes uses the deployment on the run down the hill, as Antonelli very quickly reaches 330 km per hour at the foot of Eau Rouge, whereas Norris only reaches 308 km per hour. So for now, things are actually looking pretty good for Mercedes this year compared to McLaren last year, but by the time they reach the top of the hill, Antonelli's speed has dropped to 302 km per hour as he loses 28 km per hour. But again, this makes sense. I don't actually have a problem with this. That is kind of what you would expect, given these cars don't have as much downforce, and if he took Eau Rouge at 330 km per hour, he would probably lose the back end and have a horrific incident. So at that point, I don't really mind. But it's after this where things start to get a bit meh for the modern day cars. On the run down the Kemmel Straight, we see Kimi use deployment early on, but due to the nature of these cars, he runs out of battery about 20 or 30% down the straight, and then spends the next 70 or 80% slowly losing top speed, whereas Norris last year was able to then activate DRS, and his speed just continues to climb. By the time they've reached Les Combes, Antonelli's speed has dropped to 300 km per hour, whereas Norris is doing 340 km per hour. This makes the challenge of Les Combes corner much more difficult for Lando Norris, because his arrival speed is significantly higher, and as you would expect, it is advantage Norris all the way through Les Combes, whereas Kimi Antonelli actually coasts into the Les Combes corner, and that's just not impressive to watch. Back to going through Les Combes itself, yes, Norris is faster, which you would expect, but I actually don't mind that. I want to say why. It's because these modern cars don't have as much downforce as last year's cars, and honestly, I am fine with that. I don't mind the cars having less downforce. It's just the fact that Antonelli coasted into Les Combes that I kinda do have an issue with. The next area, which looks frankly depressing, is on the exit of the corner with no name, otherwise known as turn 9, and the run down the hill towards Puon. Due to Antonelli not having the battery, he only builds up to 280 km per hour, whereas Norris is able to reach 310 km per hour by the time they reach Puon. Antonelli takes Puon corner flat out, which sounds impressive, whereas Lando Norris does have to give a bit of a lift before he actually takes the corner, which does sound less impressive, but think about it. Norris is going into the corner 30 kilometers per hour faster, so of course he does have to give it a little bit of a lift, and honestly, it looks more impressive seeing Norris lift off going into the corner than seeing Antonelli very easily go flat out because he has no battery and no power. And the reason he's doing that and going flat out is because the car is busy regenerating battery, whereas Norris, even though he gave a lift, is still going a lot faster through the corner. Even by the time they reach Fagnes at turn 12 and 13, Antonelli is constantly losing speed as he is clipping and regenerating battery for the final run at Blanchimont. Through Stavelot 1 at turn 14, it is a bit more of the same as Antonelli is not really deploying the battery here, and you can see that as the speed barely builds up. At the peak here, Norris is 30 km per hour faster yet again. Finally, on the exit of Stavelot 2, Kimi Antonelli in the Mercedes can deploy some battery after having nothing to deploy in Sector 2, and he very quickly builds up speed, maxing out at 335 km per hour, but he has already run out of battery before he even reaches turn 16, and therefore his speed very quickly starts to diminish as he enters a superclip. During the superclip, Antonelli's speed drops from 335 km per hour down to 285 km per hour, whereas Lando Norris maintains a speed of around 318 km per hour. Kimi's speed does briefly start to increase before reaching the braking zone, but that is because he opens his straight line mode, and again, it is more like Antonelli is coasting into the final chicane, whereas Lando Norris is being last of the late breakers at a much higher speed, making the final chicane braking zone quite a bit easier for Kimi Antonelli than it was for Lando Norris last year, and overall between these two laps, there is a 3.7 second gap. As I said, I do enjoy watching these cars and these power units, and I know I am in the minority on this one a little bit, as many of you hate these power units, and you do tell me that quite a lot. But this track did expose these power units pretty terribly this weekend. I really didn't enjoy how much they were losing speed at the end of the lap. It really did feel like they were just limping to the line instead of pushing those final couple of corners. I honestly don't care about the 3.7 second gap. My issue is more about how they got to that 3.7 second deficit. If it was purely down to less downforce, then I honestly don't care, because seeing them on the limit of the grip is far more enjoyable than everything being easily flat out because, well, they were easily flat out because they didn't have any power, and that is just not fun to watch. I anticipate in the race it's going to be a lot more fun, and we are going to see a lot of changes of positions, especially for the lead when we see the top cars battling it out on track. And honestly, I think I will really enjoy this Grand Prix, as I've enjoyed most of the races so far this year. But that qualifying session was pretty rough for me. The question is, what did you guys think of qualifying? Did you enjoy it, or did you not really enjoy it? Let me know below, and if you did enjoy the video, then please remember to like the video, as it really helps me out, and I would honestly really appreciate it if you consider becoming a channel member, as that really helps me out as well. Thank you all so much for watching.